Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to tell you about the flight evaluation I did on the ATR 42-500. This was conducted on September 30th, 1995. Now, if you saw my previous video, you know that I talk about American Eagle Flight 4184 that had the icing incident and crashed. And of course, the aircraft is getting a lot of bad press on this because it's coming out that it wasn't able to handle the icing it had encountered. So this is the accident's being blamed on the aircraft. Of course, the French aren't quite going along with this, but the FAA, NTSB are blaming the aircraft for the accident, and it was getting to be a political hot potato also. And I'm not sure if I fully realized the political implications of this whole thing at the time, but I should have. You see, they invited the ALPA president along on this flight evaluation, Randy Babbitt. And we often, I will bring typically a committee member on a flight evaluation, a member of my new aircraft evaluation certification committee that I was chairman for ALPA National at the time. And typically I'll bring one of my members along. But this time I had the ALPA president, I had First Officer Steve Green from TWA, back when TWA existed, who was the chairman of the ALPA In-Flight Icing Certification Project, a team member, and also a member of the ALPA's National Accident Investigation Board. Mike Moss, who worked for Simmons and was an ATR 42 and 72 pilot, which was not unusual. I would try to bring a pilot along who had operational experience in the aircraft we were evaluating because obviously I had not flown for the commuter or regional aircraft, and my experience was in the larger aircraft for the major airline that United flew, which is the airline I was flying for. So I didn't have a lot of experience in this aircraft. So I tried to bring somebody along who did, but I conducted, being chairman of the national committee, I conducted the flight evaluation typically with other members. And also on board was Captain Bernard Doris, who was the chief test pilot on the ATR 42-500. Now, of course, I wrote this up in the ALPA magazine, and I guess they were. It's kind of interesting. They were getting more used to my articles because I didn't make the cover here about the flight evaluation. And look at there, I am the last entry there. So yeah, I guess I'm waning in importance. But it's kind of interesting. I think the Airline Pilot magazine editor should have realized that having a flight evaluation with the ALPA president on board should probably get a little more attention than they were giving it in the magazine, and I'll explain that because not only they brought the aircraft to Dulles Airport in Washington D.C. and we went out and flew it from there. It was a little difficult with the airspace, of course, in that area. East Coast airspace is always difficult. We couldn't get a lot of high altitude stuff, but I got plenty of stalls and touch and goes and V1 cuts and stuff like that. So I got a decent evaluation. The aircraft only is certified to 25,000 feet anyway, so there wasn't a whole bunch of high altitude we missed out on. But anyway, the ATR 42-500. That's a picture of it there in the magazine article. I will include that as a PDF file, by the way, in the notes here. The I guess it's the discussion or whatever. You can find a link to it there. Download it if you want to see it. But basically, the accident report didn't come out till July of '96, but they already knew way things were going and had a pretty good idea what the issue was. So they had extended the boots farther back because that was the problem with the run-on icing that had extended far back on the leading edge. Of course, even with the new boots, it wasn't far enough back. But there's a little bit of the article there. And they also made a function to the MFC, the multifunction computer, that limited flap extension at various speeds. The crew in the accident, they put the flaps down to get a better deck angle. And they even commented about they might forget to bring them up. And of course, they lost control of the aircraft and they got a flap over speed. But that was a very minor part of loss of control of the aircraft. Now, the ATR 42-500 is essentially an ATR 42 with the ATR 72 two engines. And there's a lot of commonality in the cockpit, except they had a few issues, a little bit of redesign of the throttle quadrant. But basically, the engines on this aircraft were Pratt & Whitney 127Es, and they developed 2,400 shaft horsepower. It's kind of interesting. I flew some, well, I talked about the Saab 2000. With those aircraft, the big aircraft, you're getting up to 4,000 shaft horsepower. And the DC-8, the Dash 8-400 that I flew also had 4,000 shaft horsepower, and I'll talk about that one a little bit later. I'm doing these flight evaluations in the order that I did them, so that one will come along. It also had, well, that 2,400 horsepower is 360 shaft horsepower more than the basic ATR 42, and it also has 6-bladed Hamilton standard propellers that have a 12.9 foot diameter, which is just slightly smaller than the ATR 42 and 72 propellers. Now, the aircraft has a maximum speed. It's limited to cruise speed of 304 knots, which is higher than the original 265 knots. But the BMO remains at 250 knots, and like all the ATRs, it's limited to a maximum altitude of 25,000 feet. The passenger configuration is limited to 48 passengers. The aircraft has a range of 1,020 nautical miles as opposed to the basic ATR 42, which has a range of 640 nautical miles. They redesigned the flight controls to be a little bit lighter than the basic ATR 42, and they put some winglets on there that were built to reduce Dutch roll to help with the Dutch roll characteristics. Although in our evaluation we saw no non-favorable conditions, and I flew the aircraft quite a bit. We went over to Manassas to shoot some touch and goes, and the other guys, including Randy, I got a chance to fly it. Of course, it's always fun to watch somebody who flies a desk a lot get back into the seat. They start out with airline pilots. They get in administrative roles, and you can get rusty pretty quick. I'm not going to say anything more than that about that. But anyway, it has a nice cockpit that has a lot of commonality with the previous ATRs, and there's also a shortened version of the ATR 72. And it's a nice, comfortable layout in the cockpit. I found it very comfortable and well laid out. Now, one thing I found interesting is that the ATR 42-500 does not have an APU installed. Rather, they use the Wright engine as an APU, but they to avoid chopping up ground people, which I guess is a very good thing, they're able to lock out the propellers. So the engine runs, but the aircraft the engine runs, but the propeller itself does not turn. Now, of course, they've got the flight control system, which is part of an issue here with the reversible flight controls. You can suppose that the accident aircraft, if the hinge moment issue on the ailerons had not resulted in such high stick forces being referred back to the yoke, 60 pounds, if it had been a irreversible flight control system, all hydraulic, you probably wouldn't have had this issue because they wouldn't have been fighting those forces and fighting to regain control when the aircraft was trying to flip them over. Now, in the process of flying this, on my initial takeoff, we had a V1 and VR of 105 knots, and V2 was a 112 knots. Flap retraction speed was 120 knots, and interesting, there's a 143 knot speed that you maintain if you anticipate icing conditions. And Like I mentioned, the flight controls are all manual, except of course for the spoilers, which obviously for that you need power. Um, like I said, we went out and we flew typically in a block altitude of 12 to 14,000 feet. I did some stalls up there. I did some clean stalls, and the stick shaker activated at 100 knots, and the stick pusher activated at 90 knots. Now, as you can see from the pictures, this aircraft has a T-tail. And T-tailed aircraft have the issue where they can get into a deep stall because the tail essentially can be blanked out by the disrupted airflow in the stall. So stick pushers are very important. And when this stick pusher activated at 90 knots, I tried to override it, and I was not able to override the stick pusher. And this can be an instant. You don't want this thing to fire as you're coming into the flare. That could be very bad. And we always talk to the manufacturer about that issue. That maybe you should deactivate the stick pusher at flare altitudes. And I also did some configured stalls with the gear and the flaps 35 degrees. There we had a VREF of 94 knots, and the stall warning, the stick shaker activated at 83 knots. And I got a pretty good evaluation here. I had the chief test pilot pull an engine. I said, just pull one of them on takeoff so I can simulate, an engine failure and see how the aircraft flies. And, don't tell me which one you're going to pull. And they did that, and it worked quite well. Of course, the aircraft uses a trailing link design. Anybody who's flown the Titan 404 or a lot of the Cessna aircraft know about that. It gives you a nice soft landing, but it can tend to wallow just a bit, especially in a crosswind. And there's the typical cabin configuration. Now, as part of this whole thing, we were invited to the French embassy. And, up in Washington, D.C., there are lots of embassies all over the place. In fact, our hotel was very near Embassy Row. And you go out walking and you see a lot of embassies, and they typically all look the same. They're old buildings, typically of the architecture, and not terribly big, and just all sorts of countries. Well, I should have suspected that the French embassy might have a little more prominence. So Randy Babbitt, the ALPA president, and I were invited to the reception along with the chief test pilot, and we drive up there, and I'm going, first of all, we're coming up the long driveway, and we're going further out of town than I had anticipated because most of the embassies are closer in, but this one was rather large, rather far out because they had quite a bit of acreage there. And it is a very impressive facility, and I'm kind of going, well, this is interesting. Well, like I said, the ATR series of aircraft had developed a bad reputation, and ATR and Airbus were working very hard to reverse that. So they were putting on what's technically known as a horse and pony show. So it was a very nice event, a very nice reception. A lot of high level embassy people were there, and quite interesting. I had to get back I think to go to work or something like that. Anyway, I was going to take the last flight out of there. I didn't realize that this was kind of a nice event that I was doing quite a bit of passing on, actually, because I was there for a short while and then had to bow out. That's as the evening went on, that's when the women in very beautiful gowns started to arrive. In fact, two very beautiful young ladies got out of the taxi that I got into to take to go back to the D.C. airport to come home. Very beautifully dressed. And that's when I start to realize that I may have been passing on what was amounting to a very nice party. Well, anyway, be that as it may, the ATR, of course, suffered reputational issues and never fully properly, I would say, addressed the icing issue because of the fact that the icing could extend farther than even the extended boots, and it was basically moved south until the aircraft, of course, were essentially phased out. But that's the story on the ATR 42-500 flight evaluation. I Hope you found it interesting and informative. Thanks for watching.